Let's talk about, guys, expenses that you run through the business that will not exist for a future owner. Separating those and why. If we're looking at a shop that's looking to get out, talk about that.
So let's be real. Every single body shop, or I should say, dang near every single body shop, runs expenses through their business that won't exist post sale. I recently had a client that had a very large racing operation that they ran through their business as advertisement. I've got another client that has a whole lot of classic cars that they run through their business. Again, these are all sources of advertisement for them. It kind of sets them apart, makes them kind of a niche. So they're absolutely business expenses, but they're not expenses that, a new owner is likely going to take on. They're going to have their own model, their own niches. So all of these expenses that you run through your business, whatever they are, and I'm not here to judge, you should really have a way to track those and identify those, because when you go to sell, you're going to want to know what those expenses are. And you don't want to have to go on some huge, we'll call it hunting expedition. So if you start thinking about putting those expenses in certain accounts and calling them what you wish, maybe you have several accounts, a good example of this is dining out. A lot of customers have a lot of dining out and travel and things like that. And maybe you've got two different accounts, for that. Maybe one is like travel A, travel B, for example. And then being able to have it clean and cut. And then, these are the actual expenses that will exist post sale. And these are the expenses that won't exist. So that when you're trying to create a list of what those actual expenses that won't exist post sale, it makes it super easy to put it together. I have one client that I think right now we are solidly 2.5 months in, trying to help them to create a list of all of the things that they run through their shop that won't exist post sale, because it's so scattered through their P&L. And we get to the bottom and we think we have everything. And then they come back and they're like, oh, I remembered this. Oh, I remembered that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But gosh, it's so difficult for them. Like, I can't imagine. And I know they've been telling me that they've been waking up in the middle of the night, at 2 a.m, thinking about this stuff. And nobody needs that monkey on their back. You know what I mean? And it's such an important part of selling, when you do decide to sell, because ultimately, whatever expenses that you run through the business that won't exist post sale are going to significantly increase the value of your shop post sale, or at the selling point, I guess I should say.
One reason it can take a long time, if you're not trying to keep an eye on this as you go, is that when we take a look at a company that is considering selling their shop, we're looking at several years. It might be 3 years or 3.5 years or 4.5 years. And if that's the case, I've actually had clients I'm chatting with about, let's see what we call ad backs. What kind of ad backs do you have? And some of them start off with, well, I'm going to have to start looking through the accounting records. And I'm thinking, oh boy, that's the last thing I would want to do, because they're talking about maybe 50 to 75 different expense categories, 4 years and 12 months per year. And that's why, Laura, as you point out, sometimes it can take, a week or 2 or 3. And they're like, well, we're only halfway done. That's because you're just like scanning. I would point out one thing, and that's that, we don't really worry too much about if you sponsor a little league team for $150 a year, and maybe a new owner's not going to do that, but maybe they will. It's just not enough of a dollar amount to get too worried about. But the key here is that businesses, one of the ways, there's several, but one of the ways to value a business is based upon the profitability of your business. And a buyer is going to consider, well, how profitable will the business be if I were to take it over? And if that happens, and you've been spending money on things that, we will end up determining are good ad backs to use, that's going to increase the profitability of your business, which is going to increase the valuation of your business. So it's absolutely in your self-interest, if you are going to sell, to think about this carefully. I always counsel people to, not to be hunting too hard for this. I don't want people to stretch the truth because, it can destroy your credibility. And people may say, well, I don't know if I want to work with this guy after all, or that now I may have to dig in a lot more due diligence. But it's really important. And as Laura points out, that most of the time, these are not anything that's going to cause red flags with the IRS. It could be that you've got a really profitable shop and you decide that you're going to be driving a Mercedes and the business is going to pay for your Mercedes. And that maybe you've got so much profitability, you pay yourself a really, really handsome salary, maybe double what you used to pay yourself 20 years ago or 10 years ago. That's fine. The IRS is more than happy to have you accept all kinds of wage income. But a buyer is looking at like, okay, you got to think from their point of view. Let's just say it's 200 grand. Buyers are going to say, well, I'm going to replace you with a general manager, and I might only have to pay that person $95,000 a year. It depends on your market. But therefore, you've got an extra $105,000 a year in this example that would be considered an add back. And that could be worth a few $100,000 added to the value of your business, just that one line item.